great way to worship, isn't it? I love it. I love it when a church has good music. You know what I mean? Have you ever been to a church and it's just, you want to leave about 5 minutes into the service, but you know you can't because everyone's going to be looking at you, or is that just me? I hate to admit, I've been the pastor of that church. Please don't. We really want you there. No, my goodness. So, and I tell you, it was great to see all those kids up here just a few minutes ago, wasn't it? I got to say, Keith, Pastor, this is the first time I've ever seen anybody giving out cash at a children's service.
He does.
So therefore, next time my kid won't be in the nursery, she's going to be up here. So actually, as you mentioned earlier, excuse me, that my daughter's actually a student here at the preschool, right? Does anybody else here have kids in preschool? I know at least one over here earlier. So yeah. And my daughter, she's about 3.5 years old, and I love that age for kids, you know? Because they're just old enough to start kind of understanding what's going on in the world, but at the same time, they're young enough that like even the littlest of things will just excite them to no end. You guys know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Makes parenting really fun. So I took my daughter to the dollar store the other day, for example, and we're just going up and down the aisles, and she comes across this. This is Chase from the Paw Patrol, her favorite cartoon. And the second she sees this little cheap piece of plastic, she tells me, "Oh, Daddy, look, it's Chase. Oh, Daddy, can I have it, please? Oh, Daddy, please." You guys know the feeling? Yeah, it's dangerous bringing a kid into the dollar store, isn't it? And so, it's the dollar store, and I gave it. Second, I told her she could put it in the cross, she just starts squealing with delight. I mean, there's people coming around the aisle like looking at what just happened for this kid. She's, "Thank you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. Thank you." So I walked away and she had the whole set. But sorry, dear. But, the thing is, it got me thinking later on that day, I think first off, I got played by my daughter. That's the truth. But, on the other hand, isn't it true that even though we don't get excited or overwhelmed by little things in life, there's still things that happen in life that just overjoy us and just overwhelm us with something good, right? Yeah. Like remember if you're married when you got engaged. You just couldn't take that grin off your face. You're so excited. Or when you got married, or when your first kid was born. Or maybe not. Maybe it's when you landed that job that you always wanted, or you got that promotion or that deal that you were just so hopeful for, and it comes, and it's just, you stand a little taller, and there's a smile on your face. You guys know the feeling? Mm-hmm. But if we're being honest, though, sometimes it's the opposite way of being overwhelmed, isn't it? I mean, sometimes we find ourselves in these positions where just things are happening in life, and it's just one like bad thing after another. We just find ourselves in a pit, right? Like, for example, maybe you had a death in your family. Or maybe you lost that job you were so excited to get. Or maybe your marriage is on the rocks. And, when those kind of things happen, it does something to us where we just find ourselves stuck in this negative place. And, it doesn't even have to be anything that dark either, does it? I mean, sometimes we're just overwhelmed by life itself, aren't we? Like if you have 2.5 kids that you never see, because you're working that dead-end job that you hate, and now suddenly your commute to work is like 5 hours longer because this is Nashville and that's what happens. and then you wish you could quit because this is Nashville and that's what happens, so you can't afford another place. And then you haven't seen your husband or your wife in weeks, and you're pretty sure you're still married, but you're not quite sure about it, and life just stretches you so thin, you just find yourself just exhausted and worn out and overwhelmed by everything. I think we've all had those seasons and those moments of our lives, haven't we? If you haven't, it's coming, right? Jesus says, in this life, you will have trouble. I got bad news for you. But the thing is that unlike its more positive counterparts, where it's just like one moment, one thing happens, you get that job, and then you move on with your life, usually a better life. You ever notice when it's like the overwhelming bad stuff, it's not just like one moment and then it's over. It just becomes like an entire season of your life, So, because it's never just one thing that's going rotten, is it? It's like one thing after another, after another, after another. And I know we all hate it, but the thing is that when that happens, it starts to change something inside of us. And with everything that comes one after another, doesn't it just push us down and down and down to a point where we just don't feel like we can get out of it? Perfect example. Many years ago, actually right before my daughter was born, I decided to take on a job at a nonprofit. It was supposed to be an easy job, give me a little bit more time with my family, and it wasn't. It was called fire control. It was one thing after another at this job, and my stress level was just cranking up. And then as my wife was pregnant at that time, so already at home, I'm stressed out. We're first-time parents, don't really know what's going on, all of that coming. And then all of a sudden, my mother-in-law passes away. And my mother-in-law was the rock, the matriarch of the family. You guys know what I mean? And when she passed, it was devastating for us. 6 weeks later, my daughter was born. And that's a great thing, but when you're first-time parents and you're already in a bad spot, and now you're sleep-deprived, and now you're going through all of these other things, it's just one thing after another, and I could just feel myself getting more and more worn out. Then my wife loses her job. Then our insurance comes over and says, oh, by the way, we decided we're not going to pay all of that hospital bill that we told you we were going to pay, and I don't know how on earth we're going to do this on one income. One thing after another. And then one day I get a phone call from my boss. He says, Patrick, I hate to tell you this, there was a major accounting error in the home office. We're laying off your entire department effective immediately. It's a whole lot of layers. And I remember just sitting there one night, rocking my daughter to sleep, who was sick. It's like 3 a.m, and I just broke down. Because I was ashamed. I couldn't provide for my family. I was terrified about how we were going to get out of this mess. I was worried about whatever tomorrow would bring. I had no clue what was next in my life. And you know what? I couldn't find any way out of it, so I just broke. You been there? It happens. And you know, the thing is that when those kind of things, one after another, pushes you down, it starts to define who we are in our life, doesn't it? It's like every thought we have tends to be negative. Every good thing, we look for the negative or how it's going to fall through. That's just what happens to us. In fact, I like how it says this in Proverbs, the 23rd proverb. If we could pull it up, it says this. Oh, not that one. That one. No. Yes. For as a man thinks within himself, so he is. I love that translation. Because our thoughts, the kind of mood we're in, our viewpoint on everything around us, the more negative and dark it becomes up here, the more that really is who and what we are. And so in our reading from Isaiah today, it's this sense of just being overwhelmed by life. That God is trying to speak a little bit of life into and a little bit of hope into for us. But you know, God knows that sometimes we need just something a little bit more. And I love how he presents this. Because Isaiah, he was living in actually a very difficult time. At this point in history, the Judean kingdom, it was divided into 2 separate nations, and this very wicked group called the Assyrians. You heard of those guys? Another nation. They came in and they absolutely demolished the entire northern kingdom. I mean, if you survived, if they did not kill you, you were sent off into slavery all over the ancient world. A lot of scholars say if you've ever heard about the lost tribes of Israel, this is when we lost them. And at this point, right when he is writing our readings for today, that same army has headed into the south. They are taking one city after another, and Isaiah's city was next. And to make matters worse, for decades, in Jerusalem, they had one bad king after another that had oppressed them. So the people there in Jerusalem, the people who were hearing Isaiah, they were done. I mean, they had one too many things that had just stacked up, and they just had given up. They were terrified of what's next. They were terrified of what would happen, and they just lost all hope. I think we all get there in our lives sometimes. It doesn't have to be this extreme. And so God, when he responds to this through Isaiah, he does something different because he knows that when we're in that kind of spot, we don't just want words of affirmation and hope, because we're not going to listen to it, are we? I mean, if somebody came to you in the absolute worst time of your life and said, hey, you should have hope because one day this will come to an end and things will be great. Yeah, those people, what are they thinking? It's like, yeah, one day this is going to come to an end. I'm going to be dead tomorrow, right? So put it more on a more human context, a more relatable context. Imagine that you just went through a terrible breakup. I mean, something that you didn't expect, and you're just devastated by it. And you go to see a friend, and you're not just devastated. I mean, you're having the ugly cry. You know what I mean? Just you're sobbing and you're broken. And your friend comes to you and says, hey, don't worry about it. There's plenty of fish in the sea. That's not your friend for much longer, is it? Because that doesn't bring us much comfort. You see, what we really need in those moments isn't just hope for tomorrow. When I am facing something that I cannot beat, I want somebody to give me freedom from the situation that I'm in right now. Isn't that what we want? And it's not just that I want freedom from where I am right now, but because there's one thing after another, let's face it, what we really want is we want freedom from the power that this world has to put us there. We want this to stop. And that's exactly what God does. But God knew that before he could change our situation in life, he had to change something in us first so that we could face and stand up against whatever was next. And I love how he starts our reading for today. Read again what it says on our next slide. He says, who created you, O Jacob? Who formed you, O Israel? It's a good line for us, but the people in Jerusalem at that time, and Isaiah's listeners, they would have known the exact thing that he was talking about here, because it's a much deeper message. You see, Jacob was a figure who showed up much earlier in the New Testament, or Old Testament, and he was known for being a con man. In fact, that's exactly what his name means in Hebrew, by the way, a usurper, a con man. But for years, Jacob had tried to turn his life around. I mean, he got out of the situations that he was in, he moved away, but yet still, no matter where he went or what he did, there was one other person there to always hold him back, one other situation that held him down, and it was one time after another, until finally one night, Jacob found himself sitting on a riverbank. He had just escaped another con man who had tried to kill him, and then across the river in the morning, his own brother was going to show up, who years and years before, Jacob completely conned, and his brother wanted to kill him for it. It was a bad night for Jacob. Talk about sleepless nights. But in a single night, God came down to Jacob. And he didn't just remove all of those hardships that were around him. In fact, when his brother saw him, he embraced him. God also went through and he changed something in Jacob. He changed how he saw the world. He changed how he saw the things around him. He changed how he thought. And as a result, Jacob was never in that kind of a situation again. And in light of this, God does something remarkable. He changes Jacob's name from Jacob the con man to Israel, which means God prevails. Isn't that what we want to know when we're in those spots? Isn't that what you want to know when you're facing that mountain of debt, or you've got a divorce that you know might happen, or your family's falling apart, or there's something going on with your kids, that God has got this, that God will prevail? Yeah. But it's not enough just to say that, because we trust that all the time. God, he knows he's got to go a little bit deeper, and that's what he's doing in this very next verse. He says, fear not. Very next verse, fear not. Now, all the way back, same slide. He says, fear not, for I have redeemed you. For I have called you out by name. and you are mine. Again, this is one of those things that we don't pick up on the significance of right away, but everybody there around Isaiah, all that stress and all of that anxiety, they would just melted away at this. Because when God gives you a new name, it's one thing. It means that he's changing something about what defines you. And in that culture, it was changing about something about your destiny, who you are and who you are becoming. But when God calls you, that was a sense of ownership. When God calls somebody, he's not just calling them into a mission, he's calling them and he's placing them under his family. He's part of the household. And when that happens, he has a responsibility and ownership over that person to care for them and to make sure they're okay and to make sure everything that might be attacking them in life is removed. Think of it in terms of an adoption. If you were to go out today and adopt a child, this is literally what it would mean. If you were to go out and adopt a child, and you give that child your last name, you're committing to making sure that child is well and safe and protected and free of harm. God's saying it's the same thing with me, but it means something different. Because when God says you are mine and you're under my household and I've adopted you, it means all of those problems that you're facing today, all of those things that kept you up all night last night, all of that stuff that you can't seem to escape, those problems, those are God's problems. They're not your problems. Because you're his. All of that worry that you have, that's not your worry. That's God's solution. All those fears that you have, no, that's not your fear. That's God defending. That's what God does. So fear not. For all of this that you're worried about, that problem is now my problem. Put it another way, I talked about my daughter earlier. If somebody came to my daughter, my little 3-year-old cute little kid, and they threatened her, or if there was some situation that my daughter was in where it would cause her harm or would hurt her, those people in that situation, they don't have to answer to a 3-year-old. They don't have to answer to my child. And I don't expect her, as my child, to have to defend herself against things that she has no defense. Those things answer to me, right? That's my problem when something hurts her. That's my problem when she's not safe. It's the same way for what God is doing here. And I love how he puts it too, that little word redeem. And normally when we think of redeem, we think of what? Sin and coupons, right? Yeah, but what God means here, the connotation in that original language is really interesting. The word that they use for redeem, it actually means to pull out, to separate, to save, or most literally, to pay a ransom. So what God is saying here is that don't fear. Because whatever that situation is, whatever holding you back, whatever one more layer just got added on that you can't bear, I've already taken you completely out of that situation. I have lifted you out. I've paid that ransom. And all of those problems you had, no, they're my problems. Fear not. That's a bold statement, isn't it? But that's exactly what we need to hear. I love how he keeps on going through this. Because with God, God prevails. And what God's getting at here is that God is not in the business of destruction. God is not in the business to see you and I fall by all of those things that we're dealing with today. No, God is in the business of victory. God is in the business of prevailing. And when you prevail over something, when God removes you from that situation, God is not just prevailing or having the victory over where you are now. He's having victory over every other situation that could come later. Because when you're the victor of something, it doesn't just mean that you've survived the battle. When you're the victor of something, it means you've conquered the enemy. That is what God is getting at. God, he continues this thought, and I love it. If we go to the next slide, you see, God knows that there's times in our life where, we're in a bad spot, and we know God's got this, and he's the victor, but we're still having to live through it, right? I mean, that's the real tough part. That's really what's holding us down, is that we're still stuck there. And he answers this for us. He says, when you pass through those waters, I'm going to be with you. When you go through that river, it's not going to overwhelm you. What God is saying here is that when you are dealing with something in your life that is drowning you, when you are under that mountain of debt that you cannot face, when your family is going through that struggle that you don't know how you're going to get out of, when your marriage is broken, when your job is there, when that boss keeps on throwing you under the bus, when all of that is happening and you don't know what's going to come, that you think it's going to drown you, God says, no, it will not overwhelm you. You'll come out of this on the other side, and I'm going to be with you every step of the way, because I prevail. You are mine. Then he continues, even if you're walking through fire, the flame won't consume you. You ever been in one of those situations in your life? It's like the walls are just crashing down. Where every single thing around you just feels like it's collapsing and you don't see that hope. You ever been trapped by something in your life that you just cannot seem to beat? That addiction that no one knows about. That past where somebody hurts you and you've never been able to escape. That bit of your life you just want freedom from. God's saying, I'll get you through this without so much as a scratch. And I'm right there with you. When God talks about these things, it's so easy for us to dismiss them. Just like anybody else trying to give us hope in those hard moments of our life. And I love how he closes out this reading. Because God tells us why he's doing it. Because we understand why it erases doubt. What he says. He says, I'm doing this not because you're a good person. I'm doing this not because you're so faithful. I'm doing this not because you gave to church or you're at church or you're a pastor. I'm doing this because you are precious in my sight. You are my child and I love you. The worth that you have to God is greater than all of this world. He will give entire nations just to see you are well. He will do anything to any extent to make sure you are there because he loves you as a child, and just like any parent to a child, he's right there with you, defending and helping through whatever you're going through today. It's a beautiful image. As you leave here today, we're entering into this season called Lent. Lent is this time of reflection. It's actually a very depressing time in the church, isn't it? And I had to start off the season with a very depressing sermon. But, Lent is this time of reflection. And I know that many people in here are leaving here and right now thinking about all those struggles and all those hurts and all that past that you wish you could be free from. Think of it like this. As you reflect on your life and what God is doing, if God is willing to give his only son to die for you, do you honestly think God is not willing to be with you and help you through where you are today? See, that's the worth we have to God. And the way that we get freedom is not by fighting battles that we can't win. Now, the way that we get freedom in this life is to understand that the only way that we're overwhelmed in this life is when we face challenges that we cannot face, that we cannot overcome. The sooner we let go of the fact and the fight that we can't win, and sooner we accept that the fight is not ours, the sooner we're free from wherever we are now, wherever tomorrow might bring us. Let's pray. Gracious God, Lord, we thank you so much for your grace. We thank you so much for the fact that we are somehow worthy in your sight, that you would do anything for us. But God, as we are here today, we all know we have things that have hurt us in the past. Forgiveness is that we've not been able to give, hurts that we carry with us that made it even hard for us to come here this morning. Father, I pray that as we come to you in worship, we would be reminded of your presence. We would be reminded that our problems aren't our problems, they're yours. That you are our Savior and our Father, and that you will come through this with us.